Welcome to Season 4 of Outstanding Women Leaders, Witty and Wise Conversations. I'm your host, Katie Leeds, founder and chief owl at Outstanding Women Leaders, Owl Professional Coaching and Podcast, an organization dedicated to empowering women in leadership, relationships, and life. Owl is on a mission to host 100 million witty and wise conversations that inspire you, disrupt the way leaders think, and stir your soul into action. That inspiration begins with a set of rules to guide our conversation today. Nobody gets to be wrong. Nobody gets to be right. Everybody gets to be vulnerable. And my favorite, everything is included. We do not edit here. This conversation is exactly what it needs to be in this moment in time. We've asked our guests to join us via video to allow us to create authentic connection. Eyes are the window to the soul. You will be seen here. You will be heard. There is space for you. When this conversation comes to a close, I will ask our guests 3 questions. If you've tuned in before, you know what they are. If you haven't, you don't want to miss them. But enough about me. Today, I'm excited to welcome Outstanding Women Leader, Martha Aviles, Vice President of Marketing for Gigster.com, the Austin-based hiring platform that builds essential workforces. Is that what what does your platform do?
We develop custom software through a talent network, but that's okay.
That's all right. She's a seasoned podcast guest and was recently a speaker at South by Southwest, discussing what it's like to be a woman in first generation working in tech. The daughter of immigrants from Nicaragua, Martha came to Miami when she was just a kid. Her dad, who saw the value of her studying math and science, encouraged Martha to study both subjects. And as a result, she went on to earn her MBA and jumped into the tech world. Because of her dad's encouragement to know no boundaries, she now has 20 plus years of B2B marketing experience in SaaS, semiconductor, networking, and network security at startups, private and public companies. As a top executive, she has successfully led 20 plus mergers and acquisitions, including managing several integration and acquisition exits. Prior to joining her present position, Martha held senior leadership roles in marketing at RigUp, Workrise, and Enverus. Both companies have reached unicorn status. But being a Latina woman working in the technology industry has been far from easy for Martha. And as we learned in our bonus episode, Martha was here to have struggles to share with us, and we're super excited to hear all of her stories today. Welcome, Martha.
Thanks for having me. It's going to be a good episode. I can tell.
Yes, it's going to be a great episode. So where do we start in your story?
Let's start when I graduated undergrad, because I was someone who was interning at Cisco Systems during the dot-com boom, right? And I actually made more as an intern than I did in my first job, because I graduated shortly after 9/11. And people that don't remember the economy during that time, it wasn't great. Everyone thought the airlines were going out of business. The economy was really soft. I had an offer rescinded, and as a 21-year-old, I didn't know what rescind meant. I was like, wait, you can take this back, and I really didn't know, but it made my career. That's how I got started in startups. Those were the only people hiring. And as like a good child of immigrants, I hustled, and I had a job before I graduated. Like, I had so much anxiety about not having that job in that job market at the time. But it made my career, and I love startups. I'm a builder, not an optimizer so much. And so if you put me in an optimization job, I'd probably get fired. But yeah, I'm really good at building high performing teams and understanding my customers and all of that. So yeah, I think that's probably the genesis of all this.
I have a 2-4 generator that you have to meet, who also comes from the startup land in recruiting. And I would think she would also be known as a builder. I think you guys would have a lot in common. So yeah, so you have a lot of stories to help share and support people now going through the offers being rescinded, college kids coming out of a tough economy. That struggle. I also had that as well. No one was hiring. My first job was a student activities director, because they weren't hiring teachers with history degrees. Your dad was right. Math and science was the way to go. Well done, Dad. But on top of that, you also have this glass ceiling around Latinas in technology and becoming a top executive in Austin. Like, what is that like?
Yeah, so I would say it's taken a lot of work to get to where I am. And by work, I mean the actual work, sure. But I mean, I've had coaches, therapists, public speaking classes, all of it, right? Like I have absorbed it all. I would say that it doesn't mean that I'm not a work in progress still, but I would say probably until about 2018, which I graduated undergrad 2002. So 16 years of I was trying to be a white male executive. Like that's what I was trying to do because that's what was expected of me. And one day, there was a straw that broke the camel's back. I am the camel in this analogy. And I decided I'm not going to try to do that anymore. Like I will never be good at it. I'm not white. I'm not 6'4". I'm not a white guy. I have tan skin. My parents are from Nicaragua. I have never been Nicaraguan enough to be Nicaraguan, and I've never been American enough to be American. And so I've always lived in like this third culture. And now since then I've started to embrace it. And now, I spoke at South by last year, and I'm trying to do it again this year. And it's been really interesting to like build a community and start helping others. I'm an introvert. I actually would prefer to deal with plants and dogs and what have you. But I do these things, one, to push myself, but two, people have reached out to me and be like, you have helped me so much. Because in 2018, when the straw that broke the camel's back started, I looked for a female executive that was a woman of color. She didn't have to be Hispanic, but I was like a woman of color that has been a practicing executive before. And I couldn't find one for 2 years. I looked and looked and looked. I still haven't really found one. I have found other community and other people. But that's when I realized like, oh, I guess my challenges are a little bit unique when you look at the generalization and population of executives. But now I have found women like you and other women through my network. And it's been really refreshing to be seen and tell my story.
I too tried to fit in with those same people.
I love that you said same people.
Straightening my hair so that I looked a little bit more professional. I've had someone say to me, well, you have that like looks like you just had sex hair. Right. Yeah. So I'm just trying to look a little bit more professional there somehow, trying to dress like I'm much older than I am, looking young. It's a struggle. And even going into corporate coaching, the imposter syndrome that we talk about.
Yeah.
I technically haven't worked in corporate tech, but I'm a kick-ass type coach for engineers and like a lot of other people as well. But I just have a special place, I think, in my heart for engineers, because everyone that chooses me always says to me, I'm not like your typical engineers. I'm like, that's why you chose me as your coach, probably. Yeah. They probably, when I was a high school teacher, were like my favorite students. It's the only thing I can imagine, because I don't have to actually know what you do from day to day. But what I do understand is people and observing people and understanding how do you get the talent out of people? How do you, as a generator, will you help them get more joy in their life? 70% of us are designed to have more joy. And that starts with authenticity for me. Nothing feels better than just being able to show up and be yourself.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to have a better tip for me than Roger Ailes, but my favorite tip to give people, if you don't know who Roger Ailes is, he was a communications coach and speechwriter. He had a little messy affair, so he got a bad rap there. I don't think he actually raped anyone though. But he wrote a book called Getting What You Want by Being Yourself. And he's a white guy. And I'm like, you know what? That is the best message I think that white men can give us. We have to learn something from those people, which is that you need to be able to get whatever it is that you want by being yourself.
It's true. Absolutely true.
What are your tips then? And tricks for being yourself in a place where you don't feel like you can get what you want?
So I love that you said that, but my tip was going to be, you have to really get to know yourself and what are your values, right? What is it that you want your work life to look like? What is it what kind of people do you want to work with? How do you want to operate in that space? And you have to know, it's hard to do the work on yourself and be self-reflective, because you have to know what kinds of environments you need to thrive. And once you've figured out like who you are and you have that centeredness and that core, then you can go into environments and decide, is this environment for me or not? Versus, I think sometimes women, I mean, I am going to generalize here because I speak to a lot of them. we try to make things work when we know they're not working, right? Like we're like, we're going to make this work. Well, maybe if we tried this and maybe if we tried that. And I love the empathy aspect of that, but there has to be a point where it's like, no, this doesn't align with me, and it has to be okay. Like, let's be okay with it. Like, this just doesn't work for me. And that way you get to keep being authentic and you stop trying to kind of change your stripes, if you will.
Yeah. Know yourself. So then you can be who you are and get what you want. That's where the white guys went wrong, because sometimes I'm not convinced that they know themselves. Like they know their egos really well. And that's so, and to our credits too, so do we. Oftentimes, like when I talk about authenticity with people, what sometimes we're holding on to is actually the ego, not so much really what it is for us and who we are. And finding yourself, what was that journey like for you, Open G Center in Human Design? So you're not here to even have one, but what does it look like to finally settle on something for you that feels comfortable?
So interesting that you say that. So I'm someone that does try a lot of different things, and it's not that I'm not centered, but I'm willing, like I'm very open-minded. Let's try this, let's try that. But I know that there are times where I'm trying to force something, and there are times where I feel calm in my body and I'm like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I know that sounds really hokey, but for example, in this podcast, right, I'm prepared for you to ask me whatever question, and I don't feel like I'm performing or trying to be something that I'm not. I'm just answering authentically. And so I can tell, but I had to do a lot of work because there was a lot of times where I was trying to perform, right? I was very much a people pleaser, and I'm still, I feel like that's a recovering people pleaser. But I think you can feel it in yourself, or you have to figure out what are those markers for you that you're like, oh, I'm not being authentic. And you have to be self-reflective constantly. And I think it's a process, right? It's a growth process. And that's why it's a journey. There's not, forward isn't always a straight line.
Yeah, the body knows. So it doesn't sound kooky. We are taught that our brain has the greatest decision maker out there, right? And show me someone in marketing that can't tell you that that's a lie. Right? We create these justifications. There's lots of really great books out there. Malcolm Gladwell's written one of them where it talks about how we think we're using logic when we're making decisions, but we're really not. And the body doesn't have stories it writes. It doesn't have the same memories. We have a separate brain in our heart, and we have a separate brain in our gut. But that heart independently thinks, feels, and remembers. We've done heart transplants where hobbies will change, taste buds will change. They solved 2 murders from heart transplants. That's how powerful that brain is in there. So when we're asking our body, it's a generator sacral, my answer is in my gut. You're also a generator, so your gut knows, but you also have a wave of emotions. And so if you're feeling that your body is high or low, you're not ready to decide. And when you feel that clarity, your body will tell you. That's just not how we're taught.
Absolutely. So just recently, I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, because I think I was on my way to my brother-in-law's 40th birthday party, and I was listening to a Jay Shetty podcast about anxiety and about how so many people don't want to say they have anxiety, but when you list the markers for anxiety, it's like you're sweaty, you have sweaty palms, your stomach hurts, he was like, notice that all these things are physical, yet people are like, no, I don't have anxiety. But then when you ask them, like, are you experiencing the long list of physical triggers? And it's a very interesting, fascinating podcast where he was like, basically his point was that, sometimes we're either too prideful or we're trying to just use our heads and be like, no, we don't have anxiety, but our body is telling us you have anxiety right now, or nerves, or, insert word here that you're comfortable with. But I really do think for me, that's, I've had to struggle a lot, and it took me a long time to get comfortable with that, if you will, get comfort in my discomfort. But yeah, I can just tell when I'm at peace with something because my body tells me I am.
Yeah. And the only difference between someone whose palms are sweaty and their heart is racing and they're about to jump out of an airplane, if you have 2 people, one person is scared to death, one person is excited.
Right.
The only difference there is their attitude. And that's really where you can bring your heart in and bring in that, the breathing exercises they always tell us. But your heart, the attitude that you have towards something, even though the physical reactions are the same, The attitude makes a huge difference. I think that's also something we have to learn about ourselves. Your attitude shifted. I imagine even your attitude towards what authenticity looks like for you shifted, right? Literally into your body as being a decision maker. What were some of those milestones along that way of self-discovery, of things where you're like, you could skip this part and go straight to here?
I just think you have to, well, one is just reframing things, right? So, for example, there's a lot of times where if we're in a situation, like if you're with an executive team and you're the only one, meaning you're the only woman or the only person of color, or whatever, you might make yourself smaller. You might feel scared. You might get some of those anxiety things that we're talking about. It's not that I don't get them now. And it's not that sometimes I don't have to coach myself, but I also think I'm the one here that's the most diverse that can give that extra oomph to this conversation, because it's not group think. I'm going to just be different, right? I mean, I'm 42. My parents were immigrants. I have a ton of tattoos. I'm different than most executives that you've ever seen, but often people want that fresh perspective. And so you just have to keep telling yourself, like, this is how I'm reframing this, right? And again, you'll know if it's the place for you or not, right? I heard an analogy that I love to use all the time about a water bottle, right? You go buy a water bottle at your local grocery store, you might pay $1, $1.50, who knows, with inflation, it might be $2, right? You go and buy that water bottle at, the convenience store, it's going to be maybe $3. But you go to like an Austin FC soccer game, or you go to the airport and that water bottle is like $8, $9, $10, right? So find your airports, find your stadiums where you are appreciated at that level. And that's how you can continue to show up authentically, and then have the confidence to continue raising your hand and speaking up,
Yeah. And to deepen that analogy, I like this idea also of find your person that's also lost and not at the airport. Like, what are those things that when when you find your person that they love these things about you, those are the things that you want to shine. And those are the things that you want to find an airport that appreciates. Sometimes we have to slug it out in the convenience store for those of us that are just graduating college or in their mid-career. But what you can do is look around at what are you doing? What are you feeling when you are being celebrated? What would people want to see more of if you got bigger? Versus what I hear a lot in corporate feedback, which is this is what we'd like to see less of. No wonder, right? We send kids to school and we're told we want less of this types of behavior. We want more of what everyone else is looking like behavior. And then we get to corporate and there isn't this idea of, hey, by the way, what makes you cool in corporate is that you are different, that you're bringing that fresh perspective. What I learned to embrace about being the only woman in the room is that, well, people are going to remember me. And so I get to decide how I want them to feel about how they remember me. That's the advantage to being the only one.
And people will always, they might not remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. So keep that reframing. Yeah, for sure. I also think that we have to be our own biggest advocates, like find those people. It's exactly what you're talking about. But on your journey of discovery and learning, you have to constantly be figuring out how to be your own biggest advocate and how to be in your power, because there's too many times where we give our power away, whether that's, something happened at work and someone upset you and then you have a bad day for the rest of the day. But why give them that importance? Is it, what's the significance of that? Go back to like the rule of 10. Will this matter in 10 days? Will this matter in 10 months? Will this matter in 10 years kind of thing? And don't give your power away.
In some of your stories that you have, I know you have a lot of struggles. And one of them is you had to leave your dream job. For all those folks out there that either had to leave it during the pandemic, had to leave it during the tech crash, or perhaps they're in their dream job, but it's no longer their dream anymore because their friends are all gone. Tell us a little bit about that story and
that was my first VP job. It was for RigUp Workrise. They were an Austin unicorn. They were an oil and gas marketplace. And on paper, it's what I always wanted to do. I had a $35 million marketing budget. I had almost 40 people reporting to me. I started there in 2019. In March of 2020, before we were declared that we were in a pandemic, the Saudis and the Russians we're having issues with oil, and oil went negative, which I have an MBA. I still don't understand how that works, but you basically had to pay people to take your oil. Anyway, gas was very cheap, but we lost like thousands of customers overnight. And then 2 weeks later, we were declared that we were in a pandemic. The CEO and COO came to me and they said, hey, you have to lay off like 75% of your team. And I had 6 weeks to figure out who was going to go and what. That was probably one of the hardest seasons, those 6 weeks of my career. And I had to come to terms with like, this is not the place for me anymore. There was a lot of things had changed, right? Like when I started in May of 2019, it was a different story than March of 2020. And kind of reflecting and checking my own ego, like what's important to you here? What is it that you value? We did the layoff. We shrunk the marketing team by 75%. But then I started looking for another job, and being someone who, my grandparents don't speak English. My parents do, but I went to my grandmother's house and oh man, she was like, you're an idiot. Why are you looking for work? It's April of 2020. Like there's a pandemic, like the world is ending and they kept you, like, be grateful. It was this whole like awful dialogue that I don't even want to go into right now, but it's because how she thinks, and I get it. But I was like, no, I'm going to find another job. I can't be here anymore. My spirit was gone. My spirit of this like perfect dream job that I had built up in my head was gone. And I found another job. But, that's to say that sometimes you just have to reevaluate, and you can't get married to what it looks like on paper, because, that's not what you should value at the end of the day,
So the lessons I heard there were let go of expectations. Always bet on yourself.
Yeah.
And remember, any uncertainty that you have is coming from the ancestors.
I like that one. I'm going to write that one down. I'm going to put it on one of my Post-it notes over here.
I think we have to I am a white woman. So like, I don't know that I have this feeling about having to live up to my ancestors, but I'm an only child. And let me tell you, the weight of the world is on my shoulders. And I think that what I see for women of color that I support is that you do feel like the weight of your ancestors are on your shoulders. And what, living or not. And there's that pressure, to break the glass ceiling. There's that pressure to be someone that girls can look up to, versus recognizing that, as I told my students when I taught in the South Side of Chicago, I don't represent every white person. And you don't have to feel like you represent every person of color either. That's a really big burden to carry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally fair. It's totally fair. But yeah, always bet on yourself and do what's right for you, even in the face of.
And that is also a lesson from your ancestors. Your parents bet on themselves. They came here to Miami. How old were you? Or were you born yet?
I was born in Miami. I was born there, but I was a preemie, so I was born a week after they immigrated.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And how has that experience shaped your ability to not only bet on yourself, but also like really step into your authenticity? Parents are pretty authentic coming over here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I'm a firstborn, and I've got two sisters, and I'm probably the oldest grandchild on one side of the family and the second oldest on the other. So I would just say I built a fearless nature that I wasn't aware of until much later in life. I don't know if it was forced. I don't know if I was born into it. I can't tell you if it was nurture or nature, because here I am, a product of my whatever, right, environment. But I was doing things for the very first time for my family, if you will, right? I went to school. I was born in 1980. So when I started school, I was 5 and didn't know English. And everyone's like, wait, you went to elementary school not knowing English? And I'm like, yes, because you're now talking about, in the 2000s, 2023, people have like English ELL programs, ESL programs, all this other stuff. This was just like, you were thrown in the deep end of the pool, and could you swim or not, right? And I'm not saying it wasn't difficult. I definitely had a fair set of challenges, but I would say that fearless nature has paid off. It's why I can do startups. Like a lot of times people are like, why do you do startups? They're a ton of work and it's kind of boom or bust, but it's exciting to me. It's been exciting. And then the other thing that I take away from just early childhood is I had to learn to survive by getting to know people really, really well. So asking the right questions, understanding what made them tick, all of that, so that I could figure out my way in the world. And I think that's why I'm good at marketing, honestly, because I can like interview customers and understand, what their buying behaviors are and patterns and why, like it. Yeah. So I don't know. I think those would be the big two ahas that
you really lived in alignment with your profile as a 2-4, because that is what you're here to do with those people. And I'm always in awe of, I have so many clients who are not non-native speakers. I would put you in the native speaker bucket, but you didn't start out there. And it's just always amazing to me to be able to navigate more than one language, because I tried to minor in Spanish and that still didn't work out for me. It's just not where my little tiny brain was wired. And I can tell you, whether it was nature or nurture and your gene keys, we're definitely going to talk about gene keys after this.
Okay.
It's all in the stars. I tell you, it's all in the stars.
All right. I'm excited to hear all about this. I need a whole tutorial.
My favorite part about having you on this is also, it's so refreshing for women that are not, so we don't have to follow the men's norm of, if we don't make this meeting the first time and we don't make this meeting the second time. This podcast has been, I think, maybe four iterations in the making. We finally got here. But the timing is just right. And I love that you're playing by your own rules now and bringing more of that to corporate. Where do you see the work that still needs to be done?
Myself or in the world?
We'll start with the world. That corporate startup world specifically.
I definitely think there's a lot of room for improvement for allies and for people to educate themselves on other people's stories, right? Like, I'm not speaking for every woman of color either. I can tell you my story. But I don't think people stop and take the time to listen to other people's stories. Your mind shifts, whether it is that you're traveling or you're listening to someone's story and you get to know them genuinely. That perspective is what helps us work better together in general. And I still see that as we skip over it for revenue, for discomfort. We don't want to ask the questions. We don't want to have the uncomfortable conversations. For fear, if you're the person that's you might be scared to tell your story. You might be, but you have to do that. You have to be an advocate for yourself. So I would say that would be like the biggest thing to work on,
Yeah. And people listening to learn. I hear, people want to hear stories, but what I've learned from you is that you are a builder of companies, but also that your perspective that you bring when you're building something is so unique, because you've built, I imagine, a language at home and a language at school, and you built, right? You've built from multiple cultures, and now you have this third culture. Like, anyone that understands how to take this culture and bring them together, you bring that unique perspective simply because it's your lived experience.
Yeah, I would say that I'm really good at building like an ecosystem at work. So I always call it the marketing ecosystem, and people are like, is this some fancy buzzword? I don't know if other people call it that, but it is, right? However it is you're bringing in your customers, it's a brand experience. It's a whole ecosystem that people need to think about it as one piece, even if you're doing all these different tactics.
Thank you so much for sharing your talents and your stories with us. I know you have so many more stories. We probably should have you back on this podcast. We're definitely going to be in touch. Where can people, before we tell people where to find you, no, let's do that now. Tell us where to find you.
I think LinkedIn is probably your best bet. Feel free to message me, Martha Aviles. It's Aviles.
I'll have that in the podcast episode. So find her on LinkedIn, send her a message, mention this podcast, and she'll respond faster probably. If you come to my LinkedIn page, it's to be very authentic. It says you can wait 2 to 10 business days for me to respond.
I like the business days caveat, not just business days. I like it.
I might need to change it to 14. Like, I'm not great about email now that I got out of that. Martha, what is your superpower?
I would say probably operating at like 300 feet and at 3,000 feet, almost at the same time, or 30,000 feet. Like, I can be very strategic, but I can be very down in the weeds as well. So
what's your purpose?
I want to leave people better than I found them. Yeah, I mean, I do that with my teams. I want to do that with these interactions with whomever. So yeah, leave people better than I found them.
I feel that. And what's next for you?
What's next for me? Yeah, well, I don't know. No, I have some idea. I really want to be probably a fractional CMO, or maybe I want to have my own company. My sister's also in marketing. We've been talking about having our own company for a while, and I'm like, why don't we just do this? But I want to keep speaking. I don't love this, but like I want to have a TED Talk one day about third culture kids and how that impacts your life, and just keep advocating for women of color, because I root for all women, and by being a woman of color, I really root for us. So
yeah. I'd love to have you on to share that TED Talk back on the podcast whenever you want, the stars align again for
they will. They always will.
they absolutely
What
will.
I've learned from this.
Martha, I always give our guests the last word.
Oh, the last word. What is that? I don't know what that means.
Any advice you want to leave for our listeners? Any, whatever you got for us.
Well, I think it's something that you said earlier, really. It's like, advocate for yourself, always bet on yourself. I think that's super important.